Good afternoon, everybody. I am Lisa Poff. I am the project coordinator with the Indiana Deafblind Services Project, and I want to welcome you today to our Customized Employment Virtual Workshop. And with that, I think I will turn it over to our speaker, Janet, so that she can get us going. Janet Steveley.
Okay, well, thank you, Lisa, and thank you all for joining us today. Just tell you a little bit about me. I live in Ashland, Oregon, and I work for a company called Griffin, Hammis Associates, which is a consulting firm that specializes in what we call customized employment, which we'll be talking about today. I'm a former special education teacher and transition specialist, and for a number of years I worked for the Helen Keller National Center on a transition project, which is how I got connected with the Indiana Deafblind Project. So I'm very happy to be here today. Like the screen says here, it says I'm here because I love to talk about customized employment, which I do, and I tend to always over-prepare for these things. So please feel free to stop me. I can't actually see the chat box, but Lisa can. And Lisa, feel free to stop me if people have questions or want to add something or pause, because I'll keep yakking. Okay, so what we hope to do today in terms of our session objectives is we'd like to be able to define customized employment so you understand what it is and describe 4 possible outcomes of customized employment. We're also going to be talking about key steps in the discovery process, which discovery is kind of the assessment piece, and it's the first step in customized employment. And then I'd like to end by just talking a little bit about advocating for customized strategies in student IEPs, because I know that you're all, mostly working with students or young adults who may still be in school, and how does this fit for kids who are still in school? What we're talking about. So this is the formal definition of customized employment that was published in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act of 2014. Saying customized employment refers to competitive integrated employment for an individual with a significant disability that is based on an individualized determination of strengths, needs, and interests, and is designed to meet the specific abilities of the individual with a significant disability and the business needs of employer. That's an important part. And the business needs of the employer. And is carried out through flexible strategies. So I just want to comment on this a little bit, is that while the definition really emphasizes individuals with significant disabilities, there's really a whole bunch of people that this makes sense for, and lots of people just don't do well with traditional approaches to getting a job. And by traditional approaches, I mean that, looking for job openings and going and filling out applications and, interviewing and that sort of thing. There's tons of people that don't do well with that. And it might be because of significant disability, but it might be because of language barriers or past justice system involvement, or a number of things that just make that more traditional approach not work for folks. So really, I see customized employment as applying to a very wide group of people, but certainly for folks with significant disabilities as well. And you'll see that it's based on the individualized determination of strengths, needs, and interests. So customized employment always starts with the person. In more traditional approaches, what we've tended to do is focus on the labor market in figuring out, where the labor market, what needs are out there, and trying to kind of fit round pegs into square holes, really trying to fit people into where there's job opportunities instead of spending the time really thinking about what would work for them specifically. The part about it's also designed to meet the needs of the business. This is a really important key part of customized employment too. I mean, we certainly want it to work for the job seeker, but if it doesn't work for the business too, it falls apart, right? Because people, even people, good-hearted people might hire somebody out of the kindness of their heart, but if that person's not helping with a business need, it's hard to maintain that relationship. And it's carried out through flexible strategies, and we'll be talking about some of those strategies as we go. This is actually an earlier definition that came out in the Federal Register in 2002 that I like a lot better because it's just simple and to the point. That customized employment is individualizing the employment relationship between the employee and the employer in ways that meet the needs of both. So it really is focused on that win-win, that it works for the person, but it also has to work for the business. And we'll be talking about some ways that we can help add value to businesses. We take more of an economic development approach, because businesses hire people when businesses are doing well. So the more we can support businesses and help them see value in what this person brings, the more likely they are to hire that person. So compared to a more traditional approach, and think about how we've done things in rehabilitation or just generally in workforce development, is that we've tended to start by evaluating people and trying to learn about them, right? Trying to learn about their interests and skills and things like that. But sometimes those evaluations have been kind of paper and pencil, point in time, not very thorough or not very good at bringing out people's true potential. We've helped people with things like resume development and practice interviewing, and then helping people identifying job opportunities through listed postings, whether that is Craigslist or signs in the store or, through the workforce centers, whatever. And then, doing applications and interviewing. And of course, applications are pretty much online now, a lot of them. So it's a little different process than back years ago when I was first applying for jobs. And there's nothing wrong with this approach. It just doesn't work for everybody. So for folks with more significant disabilities, what I see is job developers trying to use this approach to help them get jobs. And what happens is they put in application after application after application. Maybe they get an interview here and there, but they don't get a job. And you know what that can do to your confidence, if you keep getting kind of rejected, as your confidence goes down and down, and it gets frustrating for the job developers, and it gets frustrating for the job seeker, and frustrating for families, and frustrating for VR counselors. Again, if this approach works for you, it's a fine approach. But if it doesn't work for you, we need to do something different. So think of this as kind of apples and oranges. Over here under the traditional approach, the question to the employer is generally who best meets the job description. So if I'm somebody applying for that job and I have some barriers that somebody else doesn't have, or I can't do the job as fast or as well or as independently, I usually don't get picked. So customized employment is meant to circumvent that more traditional approach. It starts, instead of using more traditional vocational evaluation measures, it starts with something called discovery, which we're going to be talking about for a while today. So, and discovery is really just about getting to know the person and who they are and what works for them. It also relies heavily on people's social capital, on who they know, who their families know, who the rest of their team members know, and using that social capital to get in the door, to have conversations with employers so that we can find out about their business needs. And usually what we're looking for is unmet business needs. So it might not be things that are currently getting done or even in anybody's job description per se, but really trying to problem solve with business owners about what would help their business be more successful. And when we find needs that kind of match somebody's contributions, that we're actively proposing employment. Like, hey, would you consider hiring Joe to do these tasks for this many hours a week? And this is how it could help your business. So it's a much more proactive approach in not waiting for a job to get posted, because if you wait for the job to get posted, you're competing with a bunch of other people usually. But you're actually proposing employment, before there's a real perceived need there. Because in this instance, in the customized column, the question of the employer is now, can this one person help meet one or more identified need? And it's a whole different conversation, and it completely takes it out of that comparative approach. So when you think about your first jobs, okay, so everybody conjure up for a second what your first jobs were, and it might be something like babysitting or lemonade stands, or it might be the first job where you're actually given a paycheck. But think about it. Nobody hired you because of your experience or because of your skills, probably, because you probably didn't have any, right? Or few. You were probably young. You probably didn't have a lot of experience. And for most people, when I ask this question in a live group, when you think about how you got that first job, it was usually through some sort of social connection. It was like, oh, well, my brother worked there and they liked my brother, so they hired me. Or my dad helped me, you know, get in the door because he knew the owner. Or you know, my career counselor helped me with, you know, there certainly are those of us who actually did fill out the application and just get the job like that. But most people's first jobs came about through social connections. And so we understand how important that is and want to build that into the process. A lot of times people will ask me, well, what's the difference between customized employment and supported employment? And there's really not a difference. I mean, really, customized employment builds on to supported employment. It kind of stands on the shoulders of it. So let's talk about supported employment for a minute first, and then I'll show you how that works. Supported employment came about in the 80s, when prior to that, most work opportunities for people with disabilities were occurring in sheltered workshops. So people had to go to a certain place to get the support they needed to work, and the sheltered workshop only had certain types of work usually. So, you know, you kind of got the choice to either work there or not work there. There wasn't a lot of variety, or it didn't really meet a lot of people's, you know, into specific needs. But they defined supported employment as real work for real pay, so, you know, real jobs, in integrated environments, so places where people without disabilities work too, and that the provision of ongoing support would be moved to that community job site. As opposed to having to go to the sheltered workshop now, we were figuring out how to provide support long-term in the community. And it had to have all three of those components to be considered supported employment. So if you think about just the little triangle in there, of the interlocking circles, that centerpiece is what constitutes supported employment. But what we found early on is that agencies really struggled to provide this support, often because they were still trying to run the sheltered workshops too, right? But what ended up happening is all this group kind of stuff started happening. Group work crews where everybody gets on the bus and we're all going to go out and we're going to do janitorial work, or enclaves within larger businesses where there'd be a whole group of workers with disabilities who are supervised by somebody from the service agency, not from the business. And we learned lots of things through those years. One of the most important things, I think, was one person, one job. You know, that the more we try to group people, it's just not going to fit everybody's needs. And if you're trying to, you know, if you were told, you know, you had to work here because, you know, all the other people with brown hair work here, I mean, that probably wouldn't work for you either. So customized employment is always about one person, one job. We also learned through time that, you know, we used to think that we could train people in sheltered environments or in one environment, and then they would generalize those skills to another environment. And it doesn't exactly happen. So we've learned that it's best to just get people on the job site with the real environment, with the real tools and the real people, and use good systematic instruction and teach people the jobs where they are going to be expected to perform them. We've also learned that we need to negotiate the task around what people can do versus trying to fit those existing job descriptions. And I think, you know, we've all thought about the example where, you know, maybe somebody wants to work in a clothing store, right? And they can do a lot of the tasks except for the cash register. So you know, the cash register is often just this big one that they'll never be able to do that independently. So instead of saying, oh, you have to do everything before working here, trying to figure out the pieces where people can do, and knowing that we need to use good systematic instruction, assistive technology, and natural supports. We started out in supported employment saying, oh, we'll just have a job coach there all the time, but that's not very realistic. Just financially, it's not very realistic all the time. And people don't need it. And businesses don't really want these social service people coming in and acting as supervisors in their business often. So the more that we can promote natural supports and really give the job of teaching and supporting somebody on the job to the natural supervisor, the better we are. And knowing that we might have to jump in and do some additional training here and there. So some potential outcomes of customized employment, I'm going to go over four. Two of them are wage employment options, which I'll call negotiated jobs and resource ownership. And two are self-employment options that we'll call micro enterprise and business within a business. And I'll show you a little bit about each one. So let's start with negotiated jobs. I think people are familiar with the idea of job carving, which is where you might look at a job description and say, oh, you know, John can do A, B, C, F, and G, but D and E, you know, probably not. So it's really working with an employer to kind of, you know, allow that person to do some of the task and let some of those other tasks on the job description go to somebody else who's maybe better skilled at it, might even like it better, you know, so it's just restructuring jobs a bit. But job creation is a bit different in that it's not working off an existing job description. It's really working with employers to identify unmet needs that people's, you know, job seekers' contributions might match, and then again, proposing employment. Let me give you an example. This is Dawn. And Dawn was about to graduate from high school, and she really liked organization. We'll talk about vocational themes shortly, but she liked to organize stuff, and she liked office type of work and had done a lot of work experience in that area in high school. And we knew that some of her conditions of employment were that she needed a very clean, structured job. She needed to work weekdays because the bus only ran on weekdays, and she was preferring part-time work at that time. So as we were exploring in her community, her employment specialist and I bumbled into this business called Ramsell. And Ramsell was a company that sold cell phone packages to customers. And when we went in to talk to them, we just dropped in one day. And we kind of said we were just kind of exploring, you know, we're career counselors and we're kind of exploring some opportunities for young women who we work with who likes to organize. And the woman we were talking with was the supervisor of the customer service representatives. And right away I thought, oh, customer service, ooh, you know, that usually involves a lot of talking, and Dawn doesn't talk. So this might not be such a good match, but we stayed for a while and we chatted with her. And she was telling us about what the customer service reps do, which is basically sell phone packages over the phone. And at one point we asked her, is there anything that doesn't get done around here or doesn't get done well enough or to your liking? And right away she said, filing. She said, filing's a bad word around here. People pay their kids to come in and file. And she kind of went on about it a little bit. So at the end of the interview, we asked her to give us a little tour, and she took us to the filing room. And it was a fairly large room, and it was stacked with 4-drawer file cabinets. And on top of each file cabinet was this huge stack of paper waiting to be filed. We said, hey, you're not kidding, this filing is a problem. What's going on? And it turned out that customer service reps make commission when they're on the phone selling, and they don't make commission when they're in the file room filing. So filing wasn't getting done. So about a week later, we went back with a proposal for her. And then we said, the proposal said, hey, we're proposing that you hire Dawn for X number of hours a week to come in and do your filing. And this is the benefit to you, to your company, Ramsell, that it'll increase efficiency because you can find the paperwork when you need it, that it may help you generate more income because your customer service reps are on the phone and not in the file room, and it will certainly improve employee morale because it was pretty clear that none of the customer service reps like filing. So when presented with a proposal like that, you know, the employer said, what a great idea. You know, why didn't we think of that before? It was kind of, you know, that partly. So they hired her, and that was her first job, and she was there for a couple of years, which is, you know, for a young person out of high school, a couple of years is a pretty long job. The second potential outcome of customized employment is something we call resource ownership, which is still job creation. It's still a negotiated job, but with a twist. And the twist is that the job seeker brings something to that employment relationship. And it's usually like a piece of equipment, but it might be some specialized training. It could be some other things, but usually it's equipment. And that equipment helps that business generate more income, which is what allows them to pay that person. So it's an economic development approach where we're supporting businesses in ways that help them generate more income so that they can hire this individual. Here's an example. And in this case, this is Scott. And Scott was already working at a restaurant, which was something he wanted to do. You know, he liked food and he liked the whole culinary scene. And he was working part-time at a restaurant. Things were going well, but he really wanted more hours. And the restaurant really couldn't support, you know, just financially, they couldn't give him more hours. So when they started talking with the business about what might help them generate more income, it got into this discussion about their desserts and how they were purchasing desserts from other companies. And when you do that, there's not much of a markup on it. But they were starting to say, you know, if we did our own desserts in-house, there'd be more of a markup, which would allow it, you know, more profit, allow us to hire Scott more hours. And so, long story short, what ended up happening is through a variety of sources, Scott was able to purchase an ice cream machine. And so they're making their, he was still, the machine belonged to him, right? It was purchased, Scott and his mom kicked in some money, and there was something called PASS, which is a Social Security work incentive that helped get him some money. And I think VR kicked in. And actually the employer kicked in some money too. And they bought, it was like a $10,000 ice cream machine, but that ice cream machine allowed Scott more hours at work, getting to the goal that he wanted. They actually, in this case, also started branding the ice cream as Scott's Ice Cream and letting him kind of sell it as a self-employment opportunity on the side. But resource ownership is when somebody brings something to the business that helps generate that job. When I first heard about this, I thought this sounded a little weird. It's like, it sounds like you're just buying somebody a job. But think about it. You know, lots of us are required to have degrees for a job, which is something we pay for out of pocket, or vehicles, or tools, or things like that. So it's not really all that unusual. They're assets that help make us more marketable. And that's the same thing here. On the self-employment side, there's a couple of different options. One is micro-enterprise, which are small businesses in the US that's defined as either owner-operated or employing 5 or fewer employees. So we're talking about very small businesses. They may not have any employees. They're generally operated just to support oneself or one's family. The goal isn't to, you know, become a Amazon and hire a lot of people. And you often might hear of micro-enterprise attached to micro-lending with that idea, you know, it kind of came out of third world countries. If we help this family buy a cow and then that cow generates milk and they sell the milk and, you know, helps them keep going, helps define a business. So this is an example of the first person who I was asked to help with a self-employment outcome. And it was several years ago, and I had no idea what I was doing, even though I was self-employed myself. And I was really asked to be part of the team to help with financing this self-employment venture. But Alan was somebody who was kind of a rough, tough guy at the institution for a long time. And I think somebody unmuted there. Let's see if there we go. So it was kind of his rough, tough guy. But when he talked about plants, he just got real soft and real nurturing. And some things that we knew about Alan were that he really needed a late morning or afternoon start, not because he was lazy, but because he had a really severe seizure disorder, and the medication he took just really kind of knocked him out in the morning. It wasn't very functional. He used a wheelchair, so he needed a physically accessible work site, and he just preferred being outside. He was always hot. He was always wearing shorts in the middle of the winter. So as we started looking at jobs for him, we'd actually tried him out in a nursery, in a large nursery where it was more accessible, and he was doing some watering, but it all happened early in the morning, so it wasn't really working for him. And we started thinking, well, gee, you know, he has a lot of support, both through employment and his residential program. His group home has this gigantic yard, lots of space to put a greenhouse. You know, maybe this is something we should look into. And so that was the first business he started. What I tend to find with self-employment is it's usually not people going, I want to be a business owner. It's usually people who just have some passion about what they're doing, whether that's computers or dogs or baking cookies or dog treats or doing nails, or, you know, whatever that might be. This fella up in the left-hand corner, he's doing vending machines, and it's not particularly that you know, candy was something they was that into, but he was a blind man with a traumatic brain injury, and what he didn't want to do was sit in one place all day. You know, he wanted to be moving around. So that was a business idea that you know, the team had thought of that could keep him moving around. So so usually it's based on just what people want to do, and as you get into planning and customized employment, sometimes some self-employment opportunities come up. Now, we always say self-employment is potentially for anyone, but it's not for everyone. You know, there's lots of reasons that people might prefer wage employment, and certainly some things that need it to be in place for self-employment to be successful for somebody. And I think those three things are represented here by this three-legged stool. And we all know what happens when a three-legged stool doesn't have one leg, right? Tips over. So if self-employment's being considered, it has to first and foremost fit the person, that it matches their interest and their conditions of employment. It also has to be feasible in that, you know, the business can actually make money. There's nothing wrong with hobby businesses, but we're in the employment business here, and it's very hard to get Voc Rehab or anybody else to fund a plan that can't show that it can produce some income. And the third part, and this is sometimes the trickiest one, I think, is that support is available, not only upfront in planning the business, but long-term in managing the business too. So those are three really important things. Now, sometimes when I talk about self-employment, people think I'm only talking about people with you know, not very significant disabilities, or people who do well on the entrepreneurial test, you know, the people that jump out of bed at 4:30 in the morning and eat and breathe their business, that sort of thing. But really, I think as long as we're paying attention to those three legs of the stool, it can work for anybody. Now, some people, you know, I think the other thing I hear is it only works when the family's really involved. And having that kind of support really is helpful. But I think that the real issue is do people have support, whether it's their family or whether it's somebody else. So I want to show you this video about Eddie. And Eddie lives in Washington. And Eddie doesn't have family. You know, he lives in a group home. They really tried to take what they learned in Discovery and make a business opportunity for him.
Next, this process is incredible. A Spokane artist whose work is inspiring everyone around him. His choice of paintbrush is a little unusual. And tonight, a story about a Spokane artist whose work is inspiring everyone around him.
Light Talk shows us that the beauty and mystery in his art is just like his last 21 years of life.
Pure determination. It's just pure creation. It's pure expression. This process is incredible.
21-year-old Eddie Kerr paints with frisbees.
Eddie is incredibly unique in what he does.
And artists like Jesse Swanson, who provide studio space for Eddie, are in awe of how he does it.
For me, the appreciation really came from just understanding how this piece was made. So what's amazing about art is that one piece of art can be viewed a million different ways by a million different people.
And just like his art, you could say that Eddie has been seen a million different ways too. Given up at birth to this day, many see Eddie's limitations first.
Do you come play with me? Yeah? You can play with me in your room? Do you think about it?
He has autism, cerebral palsy, and he doesn't speak.
And we're probably going to veg out and hang out because it's so cold today, Eddie. Is that okay, Eddie? Yeah, and that's kind of how he lets us know, yeah. He'll shake his head no.
But Christine Wardell, the director at the group home where Eddie lives, sees more than his limitations.
I'm right here with you. I'm right here with you.
She sees his beauty.
Can you show me your Eddie dance one more time? Oh, yeah. It's like literally the coolest dance ever.
She says Eddie's past is as mysterious as his art. You said you were able to track back to when he was 13 years old, but not before that.
Not too much before that, except for his medical history, what's kind of traveled with him throughout. That's how I was able to find out he was born premature and stuff.
She doesn't know where Eddie lived as a child or where he learned to do this.
From what we know, it was the teacher that he'd been at previous to Ferris. It was just like an art therapy that she had tried, and I don't know how the frisbee came into play, but once they figured that out, it was just like game on. It's the finesse and just his skill that he has, especially because he can't see, which is just phenomenal.
Eddie is blind.
It's just amazing to see him create his work and just light up from the inside of what he's doing, and then being able to share and show that with people.
Major physical and intellectual disabilities, unable to talk, and unable to see, Eddie is still communicating.
Do you like your painting, buddy? Yeah. Aw, yeah.
The ultimate goal of life is really to create something that just lights you up inside and makes you just completely happy.
Absolutely love that.
Wow.
That's amazing. I hope he sells his stuff. We're going to find out that part next.
Very cool.
Very cool.
Okay, let's see, I'll get out of here. Oops. Oops. Oopsie. Get out of there. Stop. There we go. Okay. You know, so for Eddie, and I'd love to hear people have any comments about the video there. I mean, Eddie clearly has, you know, multiple disabilities. He has pretty limited skills, but he has this one really unique skill. And it's amazing watching him do this thing with the frisbee. I mean, nobody else can do that. I know a bunch of us that we're working with him, we tried. Nobody could do that, what he does. He can do it fast, he can do it slow. It's amazing. But what's really clear is he's really happy when he's doing it. And so people were able to figure out a way that he could use that skill in an employment situation. And the other really cool thing they did is to to partner up with this artist co-op in Spokane that, and this isn't just for Eddie. I mean, Eddie rents space in the co-op, but the co-op in return for that rent does lots of things for him. They frame his work. They provide shows, not just to him, but for all artists in the co-op. And he's among this community of artists who have gotten to know and love him. You know, so it's really, really a cool thing. So self-employment can look really different, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to, you know, have less significant disabilities or have a family that's there really supporting you. It just needs to do those three things on the stool, right? It fits the person, it has some business feasibility, and support is available. And he did have a lot of support there. So the fourth thing that I want to talk about is an outcome we call business within a business. And it's also self-employment. It can also be a micro enterprise, but again with a twist, in that it's operated within another host business or host organization. So like when you think about Best Buy, and I know you have Best Buys there in Indiana, you walk in the door and who do you see in the corner is the Geek Squad, right? So if I go in to buy a new computer, right away I'm going to need my data transferred, and the geeks are right there to do it. Or if my computer breaks and I take it into the geeks and they can't fix it, I'm right there at Best Buy and I'm probably going to buy a new computer there. So, you know, they offer kind of complementary products and services, and they attract a similar customer base, and their co-location within that building really helps both businesses. So it's a concept we can use to think about people with disabilities, often who have support needs that need to be addressed. So like this first example, this was somebody who had some interest in coffee and barista kind of stuff, and they approached a new small bakery in town that was, you know, kind of undercapitalized, and they were working to get their bakery going. And they said one of the things that customers asked for was specialty coffees, but they just couldn't afford to do that yet. So they were able to work this out where this person started a coffee business within their bakery. So the difference between business within a business and resource ownership is, with resource ownership, it's still a wage job. The person's on the payroll for that business. With a business within a business, it's really two separate businesses, but one located within the other. Another example, a fella I worked with in Kansas who everybody said he's really, really good at car detailing and he loves to do it. But when we started talking about support needs, they said, well, he'll need help with scheduling because he doesn't keep minutes on his phone, and he'll need help with money because he's not good with money, and he'll need help moving cars around because he doesn't drive. So when you think about that, that's kind of some big support needs to be working with if he was on his own somewhere. But if he were to run his business within a larger, say a car dealership or a larger car repair place, people are already doing the scheduling, they're already dealing with the money, and they're already moving cars around. So there's some ways you can negotiate that. If you maybe base the rent, like I'm going to pay the host business rent, and that rent will include certain supports that I need. And sometimes you can negotiate it so that you're paying a percentage of the person's income. That way it's more fair. As the business is growing, they're not paying very much early on, but they're paying more as it grows. So those are just a couple examples of business within a business. I'm going to pause for a second. Any questions or thoughts?
Okay, Janet, I'm not seeing anything come up yet, Janet, although I did have some people pretty excited about the video.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll keep going, but feel free to jump in here. So I'm gonna switch gears now and talk about discovery, which again is that first part of the customized employment process, which is really kind of more the assessment part. At Griffin Hammis, we call our version of discovery, discovering personal genius. And it's based off at the line about, you know, you can teach a fish to climb a tree, you know, he'll think he's stupid all his life. You know? But the thing is around that everybody has genius. We just need to figure out what it is. You know, Eddie has genius, but I don't know how they figured that out, but he is the best Frisbee spinner I know. So, so more generically, this is called discovery, and I'll probably use both terms. Discovery, or discovering personal genius, is really getting to know about who this person is, because we want the job to fit the person. So if we want the job to fit the person, we got to know who the person is. And what comes out of discovery, or discovering personal genius, is really two things. Identification of people's vocational themes. And by vocational themes, I mean big, broad areas that they want to explore that are based on their interests and skills. So let's say if somebody is really into trucks, they like trucks. But probably the things that you would do with trucks, the kinds of work you would do with trucks, you think about, well, what do? You move trucks, you repair trucks, you wash trucks, you know, things like that. Well, you can also do those with probably motorcycles or cars or trains or other forms of transportation. So instead of limiting it to trucks, we might broaden that theme to transportation, because our idea is to get lots of possibilities, lots of ideas, not to narrow it so much that, you know, that you get stuck as a job developer. You know, I've had people that say, you know, I want to be the ticket taker at the movie theater, and that's the only job I want to consider. And it's frustrating, because if that job doesn't pan out, you don't really have anywhere to go. So we're trying to kind of get people to think broadly, and even to identify at least 3 vocational themes, so that there's a little more there's no magic in the number 3, other than, you know, if you only have 2 and 1 doesn't pan out, then you're left with 1. So 3 seems like a reasonable number to shoot for. The other thing we're looking for is people's ideal conditions of employment. And certainly that's around their interest in the kind of work they want to do. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff that falls in there too, that we all have. You know, it's not just people with disabilities. It might be things related to people's personal lives and, you know, scheduling, or health, medical appointments, family responsibilities. You know, I have to be off by 3 to pick up the kids, or I've got to deal with elderly parents, those kinds of things. It might be the work environment itself, and not just the task, but the whole work culture, and what kind of environment somebody really thrives in versus environments that they may not thrive in, or supervisory styles that kind of match what they need. And there's, you know, just some other things too, logistical things like transportation, or wages or benefits. I mean, all of us might say, you know, we need certain things in place to be able to take this job. You know, if it doesn't pay enough to pay the bills, then I can't consider this job. Or I really need a job with benefits, or I really need a job within X number of miles of my home. So being kind of clear about what those are helps the job developer as you go. So discovering personal genius is a team process. We want to keep the whole team involved as we go through, because we want to use the team and the team's connections and keep it going. It's fairly fast-paced. And when I say fast-paced, it generally takes 6 to 8 weeks. When I first heard that, I thought 6 to 8 weeks does not sound fast to me, because usually somebody wanted a job yesterday, right? And somebody's, you know, parents wanted them to have a job yesterday. But getting to know somebody well, it's really time well spent, because I've known lots of people that have been in job development stage for 6 months, or for a year, or for 2 years, because people didn't really take the time to figure out what needed to happen. So it's sequential and cumulative. We've got some steps we go through, and they build on each other. So it's important to kind of walk through the process. What we always encourage people not to do is to jump too quickly to a job. And we're just kind of wired to do this. If somebody says, oh, you know, I like office work, we tend to jump to things that we know, or things that, you know, are kind of stereotypical jobs for people with disabilities. You know, like, oh, she likes office work. Like, oh, well, she could shred paper. Or if somebody likes people, you know, and they're very social, oh, well, they can be a greeter at Walmart. And we tend to jump right to the job without slowing down and learning about the person and what they really need from employment. So So during discovering personal genius, there's basically 5 stages. This is the overview. So it's the home and neighborhood observation, interviewing others, what we call discovery activities, which is really about doing some stuff with people and learning about their skills, verifying those vocational themes through informational interviews with employers. So it starts kind of at home and close to home, and then kind of builds out into the community where we're getting out and talking to employers as we refine themes. And then to summarize that information in a really descriptive narrative. So I'm going to walk through each of those steps real quickly. The home visit, again, starting where the person's comfortable, where they're kind of at their best. Usually it's a very conversational thing. And if any of you are parents, this might be kind of new, thinking about somebody coming into your home and, you know, to do an assessment. It's like, what, we're not going to go to the office like we usually do? But people learn a lot from, you know, staff learn a lot from coming into your home and seeing how people are in their own home. I've, you know, even since we've started doing a lot of Zoom meetings because of COVID, I feel like I've gotten to know my coworkers differently. I see them in their own environment at home. And there's lots of times that, you know, things that people will see that families might never even think of to bring up because, you know, it's just something you see every day, right? But when you come to somebody's home, it's different. And nobody's looking at the dust bunnies on the floor or any of that. Like, you don't have to worry about that. But it's a very conversational approach. We use what's called smooth listening, which is really just trying to let people talk about what they want to talk about instead of, you know, coming in with a checklist and asking a bunch of very specific yes/no questions. So we want people to talk about everybody who's there. So it's not only the job seeker, but people who are close to them, probably family members and anybody else they'd like to invite to the home visit. And it's really just, you know, like an hour and a half conversation about who this person is and where to get started. Now, we use open-ended, you know, kind of questions and try not just to let people talk without being too directive, but there is certain information we're looking for here. And it's really about people's interests, about the skills they have or the tasks they do, and how they learn best, so that we're sort of getting a sense of, you know, a starting base to build on in the next stages. The other thing we're looking for in the home visit is the people in their lives and who they're connected with, because we may be reaching out to those people in future stages, and just knowing who's going to be important and who's in their camp. The other part of the home and neighborhood observation is the neighborhood piece, and this is really about exploring the neighborhood. And we certainly want to know, like, kind of what businesses are there and what transportation options and things like that. But really, this is about people. And it's about who the job seekers connected with. You know, do they know any of their neighbors? Do they have connections with neighbors? Or like neighborhood stores that they frequent? Or, you know, it might be the store, it might be the, you know, what do you call them? Little convenience stores or places like that. Any like restaurants or places people go regularly where they know people and people know them. Because again, we're building a lot here on social capital. So we want to know who's in that person's community where we might be able to build. A second stage is interviewing others. This is typically to get information from people who could provide a lot of information, but they aren't able to come to the home visit for one reason or another. It might just be because there's too many people, or it might be because they live away from, you know, live farther away or things like that. But you want people with diverse perspectives who see that person in a positive light. Like if you were doing this with me, I wouldn't want you calling the teacher who flunked me in high school, or, you know, a former employer who fired me. You know, I'd want people, you know, that are pretty supportive of me and see my strengths, because that's what we're trying to pull together here. So I'll give you some good examples here. You know, people like former teachers, adult siblings who might be away from home. I think siblings always have really good input, or other family members or friends. Certainly a former employer might be good. This is Daryl, and I was working with his team, and Daryl lives alone, basically, with a lot of support in his house, but both his mother lives farther away, his brother lives in town, but couldn't be there for the home visit. So we had called them both afterwards, and a couple things we learned from Mom. And the staff knew him really well. You know, they knew Daryl really well, so they didn't think they were going to learn anything new. But one thing that they learned is that he had a work experience in school where he did office kind of work, like photocopying and that kind of stuff. And they just were surprised by that, like, oh, we didn't know that. And apparently he really liked it. So that was something that they learned. And then we talked to the brother, and the brother was, I don't know, he was a young adult too, but his brother worked in the oil industry and like in the HR department. And as we were talking with him about what his mom had said about the photocopying, he said, there's tons of work like that in my industry that, we have to keep up on people's certifications, and we have to disseminate all the safety information. He goes, there's just tons of work. So later we were able to set up an activity through his brother's business where he not only was doing some kind of simple office tasks like photocopy stuff, but he had him working on Excel spreadsheets. The staff were blown away that he could do that. There was a lot of differences between the brother and the mom, like just their expectations. What Mom was saying, I think Daryl could work about 6 hours a week. That would be a good schedule. His brother was saying, I think Daryl should be working 30 hours a week at least. He's a young man. He can get out there and do it. So it's pretty exciting to see some of those differences. The third stage is discovery activities. And this is really what it's about, is going out and doing stuff with people to learn about their skills. So we want to observe people in a variety of environments, and we got to see them doing something. I mean, not just, going somewhere and, not just going to the mall and walking the mall, right? But actually doing something that looks like work. So it's very action oriented. We encourage people to take pictures while they're doing this because they can be used later in job development stage. And as we're doing activities, we start with more familiar environments and then tend to go to more unfamiliar environments. So here's some examples. If we learned in the first parts of discovery that somebody mows the lawn every Saturday, well, maybe seeing them mow the lawn at home would be a good starting point, right? It's materials they're familiar with, an environment they're familiar with. But then I'd also want to kind of transition that to an unfamiliar environment and see how people do at similar tasks in a different place. And there's some reasons for that. I mean, one is kind of just seeing how people learn, how people generalize, how people learn. But also, as we're going to unfamiliar environments, we're starting to connect people with similar themes or interests. And those people can be very helpful in guiding the rest of the process. So here's some other examples here, but I'm just going to go on. When thinking about setting up discovery activities, I'll generally start with what we're learning about people, from the home visit. And it could be lots of things that come out of that. But, like say, for instance, what came out of somebody was saying, oh, he's a good artist. Well, in a familiar setting, I'd probably see, what kind of artwork the person does at home, right? Because that's what but then maybe I want to see something in an unfamiliar setting. I might, attend an art class with them. I had one employment specialist I worked with who actually set it up for the person she was working with to go to one of those like sip and paint places, take the art class, but then turn around and try to teach it to somebody else. We had a gal who liked flowers, and certainly in a familiar setting, I'd want to see what she did at home, if she had a garden or if there was, things around flowers there. But we actually had her go and work with a florist too, to see what she could do in that environment. And then this other fellow said he was into remote controlled trucks. I'm going to show you some pictures of him because it was an interesting discovery activity because the employment specialist and I didn't know anything about remote controlled trucks. He kept saying RC trucks. I didn't even know what he's talking. I thought he was talking about cola or something. But it turned out we said, well, Richard, can you show us these remote controlled trucks? And he said, well, I can't because it's broken and I don't have the money to pay for the part. And I said, well, how about this? How about I give you money to pay for the part and you show us, I wanted to see a bunch of skills now. We wanted to see him shopping for the part. We wanted to see him fixing it and then operating it once it was fixed. So he says, okay, it was $5 part or something. We go to the hobby store and it's this giant hobby store that has this huge section on remote controlled, mostly trucks, some other things, but, and he knew his way around here pretty darn well. He knew his stuff. He knew what he was looking for. At the time, I talked with the business owner while we were there, and he said, yeah, that guy comes in here all the time. He knows a lot more about this stuff than I do. He said, I'd give him a job if, except I'm trying to sell the business and get out of this. And it was clearly in the midst of close down. If he didn't sell it, he was just going to close it. So that was pretty encouraging. So we see Richard doing this. He gets the part he needs to go home, and you can see he's a pretty capable young man. He's got a lot of skills. He's showing us the balancing it on his knee, the, you know, using this tool while he's balancing it. He gets the thing fixed. And you know, what I'm saying is they're important because we're looking at skills and tasks, we're verifying interest, we're learning about how people learn, but we also want to start connecting people to people in the industry. And this was a familiar environment. Now we were at home, at his home, you know, fixing the truck and getting it ready to go. But as he starts showing us how it works, he runs it down the street and it kind of flips off the curb. And when he goes to get it, this neighbor walks by. And the neighbor is obviously into remote controlled trucks too. And they get talking and the guy's giving him some tips on, you know, how he can repair it and some maintenance issues. And at the end, he's saying, you know, I want to hook you up with some other neighbors that are interested in this too. And so it sort of started building these connections. He ended up getting a job. Once the hobby store went out of business, a new hobby store went in, a much smaller one, and they actually hired him to help build this like track for people to kind of test drive their remote controlled trucks over. So it was pretty cool deal. The fourth stage, checking time here, the fourth stage has to do with informational interviews or verifying themes through informational interviews. So usually by this part, some themes have, you know, come up, you know, that somebody likes horticulture or they're, you know, they're really into organization or things like that. And again, themes are those broader areas. So we're taking some things that maybe are kind of narrow and trying to broaden them into larger areas. You know, trucks might be transportation, or knitting might be crafts in general, or tattoos might be art, or maybe it's more related to alternate lifestyle. And sometimes you're kind of testing those out as you go. So getting people out and doing some stuff helps test that. These are just some common vocational themes. So you can see, again, they're big, broad areas that might have many, many, many jobs underneath it. So again, trying to be broad, not narrow here. And when we do the informational interviews, I typically, as an employment specialist, I would typically do them with the job seeker, unless there's some real reason not to. If somebody really doesn't present well, or that would cause them great anxiety or stress, I might do these on my own, but typically I like the job seeker to be with me. And I always think about breaking the questions to ask to the employer into kind of three groups. One group is just opening the discussion, right? So just questions that might get people talking. And you might say things like, well, you know, tell us about how you got started in this line of work. It's always a good question because it helps people think about, you know, their first steps, how they entered in. Or tell me about what your business does, or tell me about what a typical day looks like. You know, just to get the conversation going and learning a little bit about the business. But two of the main reasons we're doing the informational interviews is to get advice and to learn about needs, both with needs within that business or needs within the broader industry. So the next set of questions I might ask deal with advice. Like, you know, tell me about the positions that people do here. You know, what do you look for in potential employees? You know, are there particular skills or training requirements? And I usually end an informational interview asking really specifically for their advice. You know, like, and it's easier if I have John with me, right? But John here is very interested in trucks and very interested in the transportation industry. Where would you advise him to go in getting started? Now, John's sitting there, so he knows who John is, and you know, it has a feel for, you know, if John's not going to be driving trucks, he's probably figured that out, right? That driving isn't what we're looking for, that it's something else. But you know, it's really interesting. People like to help. They like to talk about what they do, and they like to help, you know, so they can kind of steer you, you know, oh, you know, well, I think you should maybe go talk to so-and-so over at this business. So they generate leads for you, which is great. The last set of questions are about those employer needs. So again, because customized employment is looking at, you know, unmet employer needs, we got to figure out a way to get at them. So you might ask questions like, well, tell us about any new trends in the field, or tell us how technology has changed your business. Tell us how COVID has changed your business. You know, some businesses are doing better right now. We've got to, you know, find that out too. Or what are things that customers call and ask for or complain about? You know, if you're talking to a baker and people say, you know, oh, people are always asking for gluten-free stuff and we just don't go there, you know, like that tells you something. A really interesting question is, if you had $10,000 to invest in your business, what would you do with it? This doesn't really mean anything to big conglomerate businesses, right? But for a little mom and pop place, that's an eye-opener. It's really interesting what people will say when you do that. I was doing a training in the middle of Kansas, in a very, very small community. And I'd sent the students out to go do some informational interviews. In the meantime, I went to lunch and I ended up at this little bakery place. And they knew I was, you know, from out of town, and we were chatting and they were telling them about what I was doing and what the students were doing. They were out interviewing, you know, different business owners about their needs. And the guy was going like this. He was going, oh, pick me, like ask me. And we just started this conversation. He said, basically, you know, my wife and I are in here from 4 a.m. to 1 p.m., but this bakery sits empty all evening. Like, what if I could rent space to somebody who, say, wanted to make pizza? You know, give the awful pizza place down there a run for their money. Or he said, there's a very small college campus over here and their food service doesn't start until 11. What if we had somebody who could take some of our baked products over there and sell them off a cart before 11 when their food service opens? And then he started talking about, and what if we had somebody to deliver our bread to other communities? He had most small business owners have all kinds of ideas about where they would go if they had more time and more money. So asking those kinds of things really, it helps you identify what those needs are. A different way to ask that question would be, what might you do if you had an additional employee X number of hours a week? And you might say 10, you might say 20, whatever. I asked that one time, and I was working with this woman who liked elderly people and she liked crafts and she really wanted to do gift baskets specifically. And we're talking to an assisted living place, and we asked that question, what would you do if you had an additional employee 10 hours a week? And they go, oh, that is so weird you asked that. We were just saying the other day, wouldn't it be nice to have an extra person between 4 and 6 every day when people are coming back from activities and we're trying to get people to dinner, and it's kind of a busy time. But she said, but who would want to work 10 hours a week? And who would want to work only 2 hours a day? When actually this was the exact schedule that this person wanted, was, you know, short hours, but, you know, throughout the week. And as she's saying this, I'm looking up above her, behind her, on top of a file cabinet, is a whole bunch of gift baskets that they give to new residents when they move in, with a coffee cup and a phone book and things like that. So we were able to negotiate this part-time job for her that suited her really well, that they didn't think that anybody would want to do that. So as we're doing this, we're really trying to get at jobs behind the jobs. Any business you walk in, you tend to see certain people. You walk in the grocery store, you see the checkers, you might see some stalkers, but you don't see a lot of what happens in the back, right? So informational interviews kind of help us learn about different jobs and different tasks and different needs that they have. In the back of the grocery store, they might be doing shipping and receiving and HR and the baker and the butcher and the candlestick maker, right? There's a all kinds of stuff that happens in the back that we don't see. Stage 5 is really just summarizing it. It's pulling it all together in a way that clearly states that person's themes and their ideal conditions of employment. And this is meant to be really worded in such a way that it's useful for the job developer. It's useful for people who are a part of that team and are helping them, helping that person get work. So this was a person I worked with quite a while ago, but the initial information I got from the school about him was that he was non-compliant. He says no to any request, which he did. It was almost like, he just said no before he even thought about what he said, really. That he was disrespectful to authority figures and that he had poor hygiene. And I'm the person that's supposed to be finding him a job, and I'm thinking, crap, what am I doing with this? He says no to everybody. Who's going to hire him? But as we went through discovery, and this particularly came out of the home visit. I'd been talking with him and his mom for about an hour, maybe longer, and right at the end, his mom said, and he's kind of a litter bug. Well, what do you mean? He says, well, he goes down to the Dairy Queen and he picks up litter in the parking lot, which is not really a litter bug. Litter bugs litter. He was really the opposite. He picks up the litter. I said, well, did they pay him for that? She said, no. I mean, sometimes they give him an ice cream cone, but he just likes to do it. And just what she said, that just flipped my whole thinking around about Sean, is that instead of saying he's non-compliant, he's disrespectful, he's about poor hygiene, it flipped my thinking to say, wow, he needs a job where he can work pretty independently without excessive direction and probably outdoors or doing more physical work and then the hygiene's not such an issue, right? But that fit with him better. So it completely changed my thinking. So his summary might say something more like this, that Sean is a 21-year-old job seeker who enjoys working outside, doing physical work that helps to maintain or improve the environment. He works best on his own without excessive direction from supervisors or coworkers, and he needs to understand the task so that he can work independently and control the schedule and completion of duties. So that sounds much more positive, right? And I will say, this is sort of screaming to me self-employment, but we'll come back to Sean in a minute, because I want to talk about the transition from discovering personal genius to job development. And that transition piece is really the career plan. And how we do that is through something we call a list of 20. So what it is it's taking the 3 themes that we've identified for this person and using a whole team to generate a list of businesses where people with similar themes would work. And then we're using that list to guide job development. So we probably don't start with all 60, but you probably prioritize the ones that sound the most interesting first, do some more informational interviews, learn as you go, and kind of, it's all about talking to employers. Nobody gets a job without talking to employers. So people got to talk to employers. And you're learning as you go about industries and where to go next. So a list of 20 might look like this. So whatever those person's themes are, you put up here, but then you're looking for very specific names of places. So instead of just saying, florist or farm, what is the specific farm? Now this is based in my community, so it probably, you might not recognize some of these. You might recognize Harry and David. That's a big, one of our big employers here. But we're looking at very specific sites here. I would say too, you'll see that I'm only down to about 12 or 13 in each list, but the reason we try to get people to 20 is because the first 5 come the first 5 are easy. The first 10 are pretty easy. But when you start asking people to get to 15 or 20, they really have to start stretching, especially in smaller communities. And the more they stretch, the more interesting ideas start coming up. And there might maybe some ideas around self-employment might pop up in here too. The one thing I usually try to avoid, but I've got it here, you see Michael's, and Michael's is a big box store, right? Where we try to avoid those most of the time. And it's okay that it's here, but you know, what we find with big box stores is when you go, you never get to talk to the business owner or the manager. They just want you to talk to the HR person. And the HR person isn't necessarily there because they're into crafts. They might be, but they might not be. They're there because they're into HR, right? Human resource functions. And their job is basically to screen people out. So we just, in general, avoid those kinds of things. But the other thing we want to do here is, as the team is generating this list, is to really try to figure out if anybody knows anybody in any of these places. Because, like I'll tell you, the people that own Ashland Sky were my neighbors. And it's a company, it's a really small company that at the time, they went out of business, but they made these bags for knitting needles and sold them. And, you know, so like people probably wouldn't have known Ashland Sky if I hadn't actually known those people, because, you know, it's a little tiny business run out of their home. There's no big sign. Unless you happen to be a knitter, you wouldn't know about them. There's Whimsy and Grace is a similar one, is that it's a business that actually designs and makes patterns for needlepoint that happens to be based right here. Sunday Afternoon makes sun hats or sun clothing that's, you know, 50 SPF kind of stuff. So there's all kinds of little tiny artisanal businesses that we tend to, you know, to not go to because we spend all our time thinking about the big box stores. And so okay, I got out my soapbox there. So job development, as we transition into job development, we're really wanting to continue to connect job seekers directly to business owners or managers, not to HR people. So try to avoid those big box places. We're connecting people based on shared interest versus immediate need. So you're not going there to do an informational interview because there's a job opening, because if there's already a job opening, you're kind of getting locked into that traditional system. And the employer is already thinking about who's going to fill that job position. You want to get there when there's not an emergency, when there's not an immediate need, and start talking to people about what some of their unmet needs are that this person could do. And again, they will help guide you as you go, but we have to go in with the idea that employers are always hiring. And that sounds a little weird, but think about it. Employers are always hiring if you can present a proposal that makes sense to them, that, you know, helps their business. And again, we want to emphasize win-win here. So that's where we go. So let's go back to Sean for a minute, who, you know, was the litter bug, right? Or what we'll call an environmental theme here. He moved right then to this new city. I had probably looked at every parking lot in this little town and was not getting anywhere with getting him hired to clean parking lots. But I did find in the city that there was a city park, and there was a little sports park, and there was a boat ramp. The city had a river going through it that had a fair amount of litter. So I'd approached the city maintenance guy about hiring him to do some cleanup, you know, kind of on-call cleanup. And what he said is basically that they had crews from the Correctional Institute and summer youth crews that did that, but if I could get him on one of those crews, he'd be glad to have him. Which, when you look at his conditions of employment, working independently, flexible schedule, no excessive direction, crew just didn't, you know, line up at all. So I you know, I was kind of feeling frustrated, and I was continuing to look, and I went by the post office one day. It had a very small parking lot, but in the window, they had posted the city mission statement. And one of the things that it said, well, two things it said. First of all, it described citizens of the city as independent spirits, which I thought that fit Sean pretty well. Independent spirit, I like that. The other thing it said is there was a goal under the city's mission. It said something like this: to actively involve youth in the maintenance of our city, or something to that effect. And I thought, well, darn, I wish I'd known that when I had talked to the maintenance guy. So I go home that night, I open up the paper, and I read that the maintenance manager that I had spoken with had gone to prison for parole violation. So I'm thinking now, I've got some new ammunition, and I've got somebody new to negotiate with. So I went back in with a proposal, and I said this verbally to the new guy first, who was somebody who had he worked in the department and got promoted up. And I basically said this, like, Sean is new in your town. He's a young man, independent spirit, who's very interested in maintaining his city. And I'm proposing that you hire him as an on-call assistant to help with cleaning up the city park and the boat ramp and the sports park as needed. And these are the benefits to you. It provides additional help at peak times and seasons. It saves money because it prevents paying overtime and is consistent with the city mission. And I forgot to tell you here, one thing I learned too from talking to this guy is that just a few days before, Sean had approached him and said, somebody vandalized the city park, or that there's garbage all over. And he kind of didn't really listen to him, but he went back, and sure enough, it was a lot of garbage, and the supervisor had to stop and clean up for an hour and a half at overtime. So it was a very clear example of it could save money. So that's the proposal part. I just quickly want to talk for a minute about IEPs and customized employment. We know that, like discovery, we said takes 6 to 8 weeks. The advantage you all have while you're in school is time. And, time is, you have even more time to learn about people. And obviously young people haven't had a lot of experiences. So it's just time that you can try a lot of things out and work with people and see what works for them. The other thing I wanted to say is that often school work experience programs kind of run people through a set of pre-established work experience sites. And I've done this too, I get it. People, you're short-staffed, you've got a lot of students you're dealing with, but what I would really advocate for as a parent is I would want to see that those work experiences are really reflective of what we're learning about people and, related to their themes, related to their conditions of employment. So, WIOA, the Workforce Innovation Opportunities Act, has directed a lot more VR funding to school-age youth and to what they call pre-ETS, or pre-employment training services. So this is really a time, and I think it's fun, like with those pre-established sites, especially for younger high school kids, it's a chance to get out and try some things. But as you get closer to graduation, I think those should be very individualized, and that might be part-time employment during school, it might be during the summers, things like that, or work experience. Also during those school years, I think it's really critical to help collect some information that really highlights people's skills, so that a job developer working with them as they leave school can really have that to use in marketing that person to a potential employer. So, school age kids, like I said, they don't usually have a ton of experience. There's nothing to put on a resume. So we want to do some visual kinds of things that really highlight competence. So the more schools can do to help collect that information. I know I used to live in Indiana. I know schools there are doing a bang-up job with some of this stuff. So also any opportunities to build social capital and to make connections with people who have similar interests, whether that's through volunteer work or through church or through whatever. And the last thing I'll say is that the greatest indicator of whether adults with disabilities have jobs, or transition age youth leaving school, whether they have jobs or don't have jobs after school, is whether they had paid employment while they were in school. If they had paid employment in school, they're much, much more likely to have paid employment after school. So really thinking about using those years wisely, especially those last years of high school, and trying to build that in as part of the IEP, part of the plan. And I'm okay, I'm leaving a few minutes for questions. I'll just summarize. So just think of customized employment as tools and strategies to ensure successful employment outcomes. You know, we don't want just any old job, but jobs that are going to last. And I don't want to say like last forever, but jobs that people can grow in, right? Not just jobs that they're going to take for a couple months and it's like, oh, I hate this, you know. Also using discovery instead of more traditional vocational evaluation measures, because discovery, it really gives you the time to get to know that person and get to know what will work for them, and advocating for that during those school years. So I will stop. I told you I like to talk about customized employment, right? So I'll stop talking. Any thoughts, questions?
Okay, first off, Janet, I had a question earlier, and I don't know if you really answered it yet or not. What recommendations do you have for teachers to help prepare middle school and high school students for employment?
Okay. Well, that would be, I mean, I think certainly those experiences, those work experiences, and again, trying to really base them more individually than just kind of the cookie cutter, because what schools tend to do is set up a set businesses where they run people through the work experiences. And I do get it. You've got limited staff, you've got a whole bunch of students, and like I say, early on, especially younger kids might not have had a lot of experience, and that might be fine. But as you get to those later years, I really do think it needs to be more individualized. Because what happens with those too is that people tend to focus on pretty stereotypical jobs. I bet there's a janitorial experience, there's probably a food service experience. Not everybody likes to do those things, right? We tend to show a lot of people towards retail when really we focus on retail instead of sort of thinking up the supply chain. Well, if somebody's, in the grocery store because they really have some interest in, let's say, cheese, well, let's think about where the cheese comes from. What about going to the creamery or to the dairy or to the, kind of thinking through the supply chain and what other opportunities might be there, because retail is usually kind of the dead end job. It's at those other places where there's different and more interesting tasks that probably pay better as well, and might have some really different opportunities. Did that answer your question? Or the other thing I think about schools too, and what teachers could do, is really building those portfolios or tools that that job developers can use to help market students to employers. And I wish I'd put a sample in here, and it might just be a one-page thing, but think about what a resume does. A resume is usually sort of chronological, and it talks about experiences that people have had. Well, school-age kids maybe haven't had a lot of work experience, so it's difficult from that perspective, number one. But also, I think it helps to see pictures, to see people doing tasks, especially if folks have pretty significant disabilities. What you're trying to highlight through the pictures is the competence, the tasks that they're doing, or the you want to make sure that people are, look the part for the job. And you can tailor those just as you would a resume for somebody else. So, and what employers have said to me is that they really like those, that it's a way that if I go into an informational interview with somebody and I leave them a visual resume, and then they have to share that information maybe with somebody else, that it's something that they can share both their visual resume and the employment proposal if we're to that stage. So if I put the employment proposal in writing and give that to them, Because even in really small businesses like Ma and Pa business, if I just had that conversation with Ma, she's going to have to talk to Pa about it, or vice versa. So it gives them some tools to share that information with people in a way that you would want them to share the information, you know? So,
yeah. So someone had just asked about a visual resume. I think you may have answered that question. And I would like to kind of offer, if somebody has something they'd want to ask or comment on right now, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and do it rather than type it into the chat box.
I'm the one who asked about the what to do with students. So great answer. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Good. Well, just so you know, too, the couple resources we have available, these are available through Amazon or through Paul H. Brooks, are a couple of books. One is called The Job Developer's Handbook, which is more about wage employment. And then another one called Making Self-Employment Work, which obviously is more about self-employment. But if people are interested, those are available.
Thanks a lot, Janet. We appreciate that. And thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.